I woke up in a hospital in West London on a Tuesday afternoon, and there were 341 messages on my phone. The first photograph I opened had been taken on a sidewalk I had walked 10,000 times. 4 black contractor bags, lined up on the curb strip between the roots of an oak I planted myself. The third bag was open at the top, and my wife's wedding dress was folded inside it, the ivory gone gray with street dust. Behind the bags, my own front door stood open. There was a stranger's lockbox hanging from the handle. The photograph was time-stamped 19 days earlier. By then, I had been dead for 31 days. There had been a memorial. There was a program with my face on it, printed on cream cardstock, and my brother had stood at the front of the room in a charcoal suit and told 40 people that I was at rest. I was not at rest. I was in a bed in Hammersmith with a tube in my throat and a machine doing about 40% of the work my heart used to do on its own, and I had missed a month of my own life. I have spent 30 years being paid to explain why buildings fall down. That is the actual job. A parking deck sags, a balcony lets go, a retaining wall opens up like a book, and somebody's insurer calls me, and I go stand in the rubble with a notebook and work backward until I can say, in a sentence a jury will understand, exactly where it started. And the thing I would tell you, the thing that took me 20 years to really believe, is that nothing ever fails all at once. Not one single time. There is always a first small movement, months or years before, and there is almost always a piece of paper somewhere that shows somebody new. I looked at that photograph of my wife's dress in a bag on my own street, and I did what I have always done. I went looking for the first small movement. I found it on page 2 of a deed. If you have ever had somebody in your own bloodline decide, quietly, that they would be better off with what belongs to you, stay with me on this one. Subscribe before you go any further, because I tell one of these every single week, and you are going to want the next one. Then hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people it is meant for. And down in the comments, tell me one thing. At what point does family stop being a reason to forgive? I will be reading them. The house is on the east side of Grant Park, 4 blocks off Cherokee, close enough to Zoo Atlanta, that on a still summer night, you can hear the Simangs start up around dusk, and the whole street stops talking for a second. It is a 1912 4-square, brick pier foundation, heart pine floors, a wraparound porch my father hated because he said porches were a maintenance schedule, pretending to be a feature. When my parents bought it in 1978, the neighborhood was not the neighborhood it is now. They paid $26,000 and my mother cried in the car afterward because she thought they had made a mistake. There were 3 vacant lots on the block. The house next door had a tree growing through the back half of it. 40-odd years later, the belt line came through the corridor behind us. Then the corridor got paved, and then it got lit, and then there was a coffee place, and then there were people running past my back fence at 6 in the morning in matching outfits. The lot behind ours sold to a developer, and then the one behind that. Grant Park stopped being a place people were from and started being a place people moved to. A house that cost $26,000 was appraised, this past spring, at $3,140,000. There is a version of this you have heard before, so let me cut it off. I did not get rich off that house. I got rich, to the extent that word applies, off a firm I built from a folding table in a rented office on Memorial Drive with 1 laptop and a set of my father's calipers. The house appreciating was luck, geography, and a city council vote, and 40 years. I had nothing to do with it. But my brother did not see luck. My brother saw the last unfair thing in a long line of unfair things, and he had been counting them since he was 9 years old. My father's name was Otis Kittrell. He came up in Macon, learned pipe fitting in the Navy, and in 1971 he started a commercial mechanical contracting company out of the back of a Ford Econoline with 2 men and a set of rigid dies. Kittrell Mechanical, heating and air, process piping, medical gas. By the time I was in high school, they were doing full mechanical packages on hospital wings and school district retrofits across 4 counties, and there was a sign with our name on it on Boulevard that you could see from the interstate. My mother's name was Delphine. She did the books, and she did them so well that when Otis was up against a bonding company, he used to bring her to the meeting and let her talk. I have one brother, Dorsey. He is 4 years older than me. Here is the part I have to tell honestly, because everything after it depends on it. Our father preferred me. I am not going to dress that up. It was not a decision he announced, it was just what happened. When I was 9, he took me to a job site on Ponce, because I asked him a question at dinner about why a chiller needed so much water, and I asked another question in the truck, and another one at the site, and he did not get tired of it, so he took me again and again. By the time I was 11, I was spending Saturdays at the shop threading pipe for $4 an hour and getting quizzed on static pressure on the drive home. At 15, I could read a mechanical set. At 17, I found a mistake in a submittal that would have cost him $11,000, and he took the whole crew to eat and told the story twice. Dorsey did not want any of that. Dorsey wanted to be in the world. He was funny in a way I have never been. He could walk into a room of strangers and own it inside of 10 minutes. And being trapped in a truck with a man asking him about static pressure was his idea of punishment. He asked to stop coming, and our father let him stop, and then our father just stopped asking. That is the whole crime, if you want to call it that. A man stopped asking his older son to come along. But my mother saw it happening, and my mother spent the next 30 years correcting for it. Dorsey was hers. She defended him in front of our father at the dinner table. She paid for the car when he wrecked the first one. She co-signed the apartment. When he dropped out of Georgia State in his 3rd year, she told everyone he was taking time, and she said it in a tone that closed the subject. So we each had a parent, and we each grew up certain the other one had gotten more. That is the only fair way I know to describe it. He watched our father take me to job sites. I watched our mother write checks. Neither of us was wrong, and neither of us ever said it out loud. Not once, in 50 years. My mother died first. Kidney disease, a long decline, and for the last 2 years of it I drove her to dialysis 3 mornings a week, because my schedule was mine, and Dorsey's was not. I do not offer that as a grievance. She was good company. She used to make me stop at a bakery on Glenwood on the way home, and she would eat exactly half of whatever she bought, and put the other half in her purse for later, and she never once ate the other half. My father lasted another 4 years after her. Congestive heart failure at the end, which I will come back to, because it turns out that mattered more than any of us knew. The will was read in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building downtown on a Thursday, with an attorney named Ronnie Vestal, who had done my father's work since the Carter administration, and who wore the same brown suit to every meeting I ever had with him. It went like this. Dorsey received 100% of the membership interest in Kittrell Mechanical, which had done just under $19 million in revenue the prior year, and carried a book value somewhere north of $4 million. He received the 2 commercial parcels on Boulevard that the shop and the yard sat on. He received the brokerage account, which was a little over $800,000. He received the vehicles. I received the house on the east side of Grant Park, free and clear. That was it. That was my whole inheritance. I remember the room being very quiet. I remember Ronnie Vestal turning a page and clearing his throat and asking if there were any questions, and Dorsey saying no questions, in a voice that was already halfway out the door. I did the arithmetic in the elevator like anybody would. At that time, the house appraised for $290,000. My brother had just been handed something in the neighborhood of 15 times that, and I had been handed a 1912 Foursquare with knob and tube in the attic and a porch that needed 100 feet of new decking. And I will tell you what I felt, because it was not what you would expect. I felt relieved, because my father had spent 40 years pouring himself into that company, and I had watched what it cost him. The phone at 2 in the morning, the bonding renewals, the year he did not take a day off, the way he aged 9 years between 55 and 60. And I had built something small of my own by then, and I liked it. I liked being able to say no to work. The idea of inheriting the machine that ate my father did not feel like a gift, so I did not contest anything. I did not ask for anything. I shook my brother's hand in the parking deck and I told him I hoped he would keep the sign up on Boulevard, and I meant it. He said, "Half that house is mine, you know." Morally. I told him that was not a thing. He laughed. He had a good laugh. He said, "Everything's a thing eventually." I did not think about that sentence again for 12 years. Kittrell Mechanical did not fail in a dramatic way. That is not how companies like that go. It settled, the way a foundation settles. Within 18 months, my father's 2 best project managers were gone, both to a competitor, both because Dorsey restructured commissions in a way that made sense on a spreadsheet, and nowhere else. The estimating got loose. They chased a hospital central plant job in Cobb County that was 40% bigger than anything the company had ever self-performed, and they got it because they left almost $1 million on the table in the bid. That job ran 19 months over. There was a chilled water main that had to be rerun twice. There were liquidated damages. The surety got involved, and once a surety is looking at you, your bonding capacity is a number somebody else decides. Their single project limit went from $22 million to $6 million. A mechanical contractor with a $6 million single project limit is not the company my father built. It is a service outfit with an expensive building. He sold the 2 boulevard parcels to cover the payroll gap. Then he sold the company itself to a roll-up out of Charlotte for a number I never learned exactly, but that people who would know told me was under 2 million. Most of it in an earnout he never hit. The buyer kept the customer list, kept 4 of the trucks, and retired the name inside of a year. I drove down Boulevard about 8 months after the closing, and the sign was gone. There was a rectangle of unfaded brick where it had been, and the new tenant had put up a vinyl banner. I sat in the turn lane through 2 full cycles of the light. Meanwhile, and I say this plainly because the contrast is the whole story, Meridian Forensic Engineering went from me and a folding table to 14 people. Structural failure investigation, litigation support, insurance work. We did the parking deck in Sandy Springs that made the news. We did a curtain wall failure on a hotel in Nashville. I hired a woman named Priya Raman out of Georgia Tech, who is a better engineer than I have ever been, and I made her a principal in her 4th year, and it was the smartest thing I ever did. I never put the family name on it. People ask me why. I told them Meridian sounded better on a report cover. That was not the reason. Dorsey did not lose the money on anything sophisticated. There was no failed venture, no bad partner, no scheme. He lost it on being the man he had decided he was going to be. They bought in a gated development off Cascade, with a circular drive and a 2-story foyer, and they bought it at the exact top of that market. His wife Charmaine had a decorator on retainer for 11 straight months. There were 2 vehicles that were leased, and one that was financed at a rate that I later saw on paper and could not believe a licensed institution had written. Their daughter Brielle went to a private school where the tuition was a mortgage payment, and then to a university she did not finish, and then to a second one she also did not finish, and then she was 27 and living at home and posting photographs of the foyer. And underneath all of it there was a home equity line that got maxed, and a second position behind that, and this is the part where the failure becomes visible on paper, a hard money bridge loan from an outfit called Ansel Bridge Capital, $2.4 million, 22 months, interest only, cross-collateralized against the house on Cascade, and personally guaranteed. Nobody signs a note like that because things are going well. You sign a note like that because a different note is about to come due, and you have run out of institutions that will look at you. I did not know about Ansel Bridge at the time. I learned about it later, in a Discovery production, on a Sunday, in my kitchen. What I knew at the time was that my brother had started calling me. The first one was easy to say yes to, $41,000, to cover a tax bill, and he paid it back in 5 months and sent a bottle of something with it. The second one was $90,000, and he did not pay it back, and when I brought it up at a cookout, he looked at me like I had spit on the floor. The third one was not for money. He came to the house on a Sunday afternoon in October, by himself, which he never did. He walked the whole first floor first. He put his hand on the newel post at the bottom of the stairs, the way you would touch a horse. He looked at the kitchen we had redone, the island, the range, the pocket doors we had restored, the addition off the back that took 2 years and a variance, and made the whole downstairs work. He said the house looked incredible. Then he sat at my kitchen table and said what he had come to say. He wanted me to take a cash-out refinance on the house and lend him $1.1 million against it. He had it structured. He had a folder. I told him no. He said, "You understand what this place is. You understand what it is actually worth." I said I did, he said, "and you understand Daddy meant it for both of us." I told him our father meant exactly what the document said, and that I had watched Ronnie Vestal read it out loud in a room where he was sitting 4 feet away from me. And my brother said something then that I have turned over more times than any sentence anyone has ever said to me. He said, he gave me the part that could be lost, which is true. It is completely true. And on any other day I might have sat with that. But then he said the other half of it. He said, he gave you the part that couldn't. And I understood, sitting at my own table, that my brother had spent 12 years constructing an explanation in which our father had known in advance, that Dorsey would lose it, and had therefore hidden the safe asset with the safe son. In that version, the will was not a gift, it was a verdict, and the house was not mine, the house was the evidence. You cannot argue a man out of a story that explains his entire life to him. He left angry. Charmaine called Yvonne that night and said some things about our family that I am not going to repeat, and Yvonne, who has more restraint than I do and always has, listened to all of it and then said, "Charmaine, I am going to hang up now while we can still be civil." And she hung up. That was in October. In March, I was diagnosed. It started with my father, actually. It always had. When he died, the death certificate said congestive heart failure, and nobody looked past that, because he was 79, and he had smoked for 30 years, and that is what happens. But when my mother's side of the medical history came up during a routine screening I had at 56, long arms, a certain kind of joint laxity, a lens issue in my left eye I had had since childhood, a cardiologist at a practice in Decatur ordered imaging that nobody had ever ordered on me before. Aortic root, 4.7 centimeters, bicuspid valve, and a connective tissue picture that, when the genetics came back, had a name. I will not do the whole medical education here. The short version is this. The root of the aorta, the section right where it leaves the heart, was dilating, slowly. And in people with my particular genetic picture, that section does not stretch forever. At some point it tears, and when the root tears, most people do not get to a hospital. Standard of care in the United States would have been to open my chest, take out the root, and replace it with a mechanical valve and a graft. That works. It has worked for decades. It also means blood thinners every day for the rest of my life, and it means the clicking, and it means a blood draw every few weeks forever, and it means that a man who climbs damaged structures for a living now has a bleeding risk that makes every ladder a negotiation. There is another approach. It is not approved here. It is done primarily in London, and it has been done there for about 20 years by a very small number of surgeons. Instead of replacing the root, they take a scan of your aorta, they print an exact model of it, and they manufacture a custom mesh sleeve, a personalized external support, and they slide it over your own aorta, and it stops the dilation. Your own valve stays. No thinners. No clicking. The catch is that it is not something you do down the street. You go there. You stay 6 weeks. And the operation, while it is not a root replacement, is still open chest surgery on a 58-year-old man with a connective tissue disorder. And the surgeon who did my consult, a woman named Adeyemi Hall, sat across from me on a video call and gave me the number. 2 to 4% in hospital mortality for my particular anatomy. Higher if there was a tear on the table. I did the arithmetic that people do. I was 58. My youngest was 15. Yvonne and I had been married 26 years. Simone was 24 and had just come to work at Meridian as a project engineer, which she had wanted since she was 9. Julian was in his second year at Morehouse. I took the London option, and here is where I made the decision that cost my family everything, and I have gone over it about 400 times, and I would probably make it again, which is its own kind of problem. Yvonne wanted to come. Obviously. She had it planned inside of a day. The flat in Shepherd's Bush, the schedule, her sister taking Nia. I asked her to stay. Part of it was practical and defensible. Meridian had 4 active engagements with deposition dates. Simone was 24, and brilliant, and completely unready to be alone with that. Priya could run the technical work, but somebody had to be the name on the door. Nia was 15, and in the middle of a school year that was not going particularly well, and part of it was not defensible at all. Part of it was that I did not want my wife to see me on a ventilator. I did not want that in her head. I had watched my mother's face change over 2 years of dialysis, and I had decided, at some point I could not identify, that I would spend real money to keep that expression off Yvonne's face. So we agreed. 6 weeks. She would run the house and the firm, I would go get fixed, and I would call every day. I set up everything a careful man sets up. Durable power of attorney, healthcare directive, updated will, all of it executed in a conference room with a notary and 2 witnesses from the office. Yvonne is primary on every document, Simone is successor. And on the clinic's intake form, in a box labeled Additional Emergency Contact Non-Traveling, I wrote my brother's name and mobile number, because he was my brother, because if something happened to me at 3 in the morning London time, and Yvonne could not be reached, I wanted a second person on that continent who would pick up. That is the sentence. That is the whole failure, right there, 1 line of ballpoint on a British intake form. I told him about the surgery 2 weeks before I flew. He came to the house. He was decent about it. And I do not think he was faking. He asked good questions. He wanted to know what the mesh was made of. Then, standing in the driveway, he asked me one more. He asked what happened to the house if it went badly. I told him it went to Yvonne, obviously. He nodded, and he said, right, of course. And he got in his car. 3 weeks later, while I was under anesthesia in West London, a corrective warranty deed was signed, notarized, and dated. The date on its face was 11 years old. The operation was on a Thursday morning. They took me at 7:10. The sleeve went on. That part went the way it was supposed to go, and if the story stopped there, I would have been walking laps of the ward by Sunday. At the point where they were coming off bypass, the aorta tore below the sleeve, past where they had reinforced it, a tear in the worst possible location, in a man they had just opened the chest of. There is no worse place for that to happen except every other place. They converted. That means they abandoned the plan and did the operation I had gone there to avoid, in an emergency, with a compromised vessel, at hour 6 of what was supposed to be a 4-hour case. They got the graft in. My heart would not take over. So they put me on a machine that takes your blood out, oxygenates it, and puts it back, and does your heart's job, while your heart decides whether it is going to participate. I was on that machine for 11 days. I was sedated for 31. I have no memory of any of it. Not a dream, not a light, none of the things people report. There is Thursday morning, a mask, a man's voice counting backward in an accent I liked. And then there is a Tuesday afternoon 31 days later, with a nurse named B leaning over me saying my name. That is the whole file. A month, gone, with nothing in it. But things happened in that month. Things happened at an extraordinary rate. At 4:40 in the morning Atlanta time, on the day of the surgery, Yvonne's phone rang. It was a registrar at the clinic, a locum, covering the cardiac intensive care unit, into hour 14 of a shift, holding a handover list. There were 2 patients on that list who had come out of theater in crisis that evening. One of them had died at 12 minutes past 9. He called the wrong next of kin. He told my wife that her husband had suffered a catastrophic tear during the operation, that the team had worked on him for a long time, and that he had not survived. He was decent about it. He was very sorry. He stayed on the line for 11 minutes. Yvonne woke my 3 children and told them their father was dead. At 4:51 in the afternoon, London time, 12 hours and change later, the clinic's patient liaison called back. There had been a serious error. The patient who died was not me. I was alive, on mechanical support, in the unit, critical, unresponsive, and they could not offer a prognosis. There would be a formal incident investigation, and there was, and I have the report, and it is 31 pages long, and it uses the word unacceptable 4 times. So my wife knew, from that afternoon forward, that I was alive. But in those 12 hours in between, she had made the calls that you make. She called her sister, she called Priya at the firm, and she called my brother. Here is the timeline of what he did with it. I know it the way I know the load path of a building I have taken apart. I know it because I built the exhibit. At 5:20 that morning, Yvonne calls Dorsey and tells him I am gone. He cries on the phone. I believe the crying was real. I have thought about that a lot, and I have landed on believing it. 12 hours later, at 5:20 that evening, Yvonne calls Dorsey back and tells him it was an error. That I am alive, that I am on a machine. She sends him the clinic's callback number. She sends it twice. He never called it. The next day, he submits a paid obituary to a newspaper. It runs the following morning. It gives my age, my parents' names, my wife and 3 children, and the address of a chapel. The day after that, Yvonne calls him and tells him to pull it. He tells her she is in denial. He tells her that she is holding on to false hope because a call center gave her a story, and that she should not put the children through this. Think about the shape of that. He took the truth and reclassified it as her grief. 12 hours of a documented administrative error became, in his telling, my wife's inability to accept reality. And once he had built that frame, everything she said afterward was evidence of how badly she was doing. On the 3rd day, 2 documents are recorded at the Fulton County Clerk of Superior Court, in the real property records, 11 minutes apart. The first is a corrective warranty deed, bearing a date 11 years in the past, purporting to be executed by both Dorsey and me, restating title to the Grant Park property in both our names, as joint tenants with right of survivorship, and not as tenants in common. Georgia does not presume survivorship. It has to be spelled out in exactly that kind of language, or it does not exist. Whoever drafted that page knew that. There is a notary block at the bottom with a seal and a signature. The second is an affidavit of survivorship, sworn by Dorsey Kittrell, stating that his joint tenant, Ellis Otis Kittrell, died on a date certain in London, England, and that title therefore vested in him by operation of law. It is signed, it is notarized. there is a subscribing witness. The witness is Charmaine Kittrell. Attached to it, as Exhibit A, is a certified copy of a death certificate from the General Register Office of England and Wales, bearing a registration district, an entry number, a registrar's signature, and an apostille from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. A county deed clerk is not a judge. A deed clerk checks that a document is in recordable form, that the margins are right, that the notary block is complete, that the transfer tax is paid. Then it goes in the book. Title flipped in 11 minutes on a Wednesday, and nobody in that building did anything wrong. The next day, he signs a mortgage application with a lender called Cavalry Point Mortgage for a cash-out refinance in the amount of $1,900,000, secured by the property. In the section titled Occupancy, he indicates the property will be his primary residence. In the section requiring disclosure of pending litigation and judgments, he answers no. Both of those are lies, and both of them are lies told on a federally regulated form, and I did not know at the time how much that particular detail was going to matter. The day after that, a written demand for possession is prepared, addressed to Yvonne, requiring her and the occupants to vacate. Georgia law requires that demand before you can file an eviction. It is a real requirement, and he satisfied it on paper. Yvonne never received it. I have to stop for 1 second, because we are coming up on the part of this that I still have trouble describing. If you have made it this far, do me one favor. Subscribe, not later, now, while you are thinking about it. I put one of these out every week, real stories about what people do to their own blood when there is money on the table. And I would rather you not have to go looking for the next one. Hit like while you are there. And in the comments, I want your answer to this. He had a phone number that would have told him the truth in 90 seconds. He never dialed it. Was that grief, or was that a decision? I have my answer. Let me hear yours. On day 9, an eviction affidavit is filed in Fulton County Magistrate Court. It alleges that Dorsey Kittrell is the owner of record, which, on that day, at that courthouse, the books said he was, and that the occupants are tenants at sufferance who have refused a lawful demand for possession. Magistrate Court in Georgia cannot decide who owns land. It has no jurisdiction over title. If a single word about a title dispute had reached that courtroom, the case would have been dismissed on the spot and moved to Superior Court, where it would have taken 8 months and a lawyer, and my wife would have had all of it. That is exactly why he needed her not to be there. Later the same day, a return of service is filed by a process server named Kevin Brackett of a company called Peach State Civil Process. The return states, under oath, that he personally served Yvonne Kittrell at the residence at 6:41 in the evening, and it describes her. At 6:41 that evening, Yvonne was 42 minutes away, sitting in a waiting room in Gwinnett with her sister, who had a procedure that afternoon. There is a parking validation. There is a text message with a timestamp. There is a photograph she took of a magazine cover because it made her laugh, and photographs carry location data. Brackett was never at my house. There is a word for a process server who files a false return of service. Around the courthouses they call it sewer service, because supposedly the papers go in the sewer, and it exists because it is fast, and because it works, and because almost nobody ever checks. On day 16, no answer has been filed, because nobody knew there was anything to answer. In Georgia, an eviction answer is due in 7 days. Miss it, and the court enters default and issues a writ of possession. No hearing, no testimony. A clerk stamps it. Day 19 was a Thursday, and it was raining that light Atlanta rain that does not commit to anything. 2 Fulton County deputies came to the door at 10:15 in the morning with a writ of possession, which is a court order, which means the deputies were not doing anything but their job. My wife opened the door in a cardigan holding a coffee cup. Nia was upstairs because it was a teacher workday. Yvonne told them there had been a mistake. She said her husband was alive, that he was in a hospital in London, that she had the number, that she could call the unit right then and put the ward on speaker. The senior deputy, and I have never met this man, but I would like to, because he did the only thing he could do and he did it kindly, told her that he was not permitted to evaluate that the order was valid on its face, that anything she was describing was something a judge would have to undo, and that he did not have the authority to undo it standing on her porch. He gave her 20 minutes. Behind him, at the bottom of the steps, under an umbrella, was Charmaine. She had come with a crew, 3 men in a box truck, which she had scheduled in advance, which means she knew what time the writ was going to execute before my wife did. Under a writ of possession in Georgia, personal property comes out of the house and goes to the right-of-way, the curb. That is the procedure. It is not cruelty on the deputy's part. It is what the statute contemplates. The cruelty is in who chooses to invoke it. They had 20 minutes. My wife spent them on the following: her mother's photograph albums, our marriage license, the children's birth certificates, my father's site notebook from 1974, the medical file for my surgery, and a wooden box from the closet in our bedroom. Everything else came out on the curb over the next hour and 40 minutes. Nia stood on the sidewalk in the rain, in socks, because nobody thought about shoes. A neighbor, Miss Adaize Nwosu, who is 71 years old and has lived across the street since 1989, came out with a golf umbrella and stood over my 15-year-old daughter and did not move for an hour and 40 minutes, and I have not found an adequate way to thank her, and I do not think one exists. 4 contractor bags on the curb strip. In the third one, my wife's wedding dress. Miss Nwosu took photographs. All of them, 41 photographs, with timestamps and location data, because she said later that she had seen this happen twice before on that street in the 80s, and both times, there had been nothing to show anybody afterward. She had no idea what she had just done. Those 41 photographs became Exhibit 14. There is an obvious question here, and it deserves a straight answer. My wife has a graduate degree. She had been running a 14-person engineering firm for 3 weeks. Why could she not simply hire a lawyer on day 19 and fix it? Money. On the 4th day, someone had walked a copy of that forged death certificate into a branch and presented it. When a bank receives notice that an account holder has died, it does what it is required to do. Meridian Forensic Engineering is a single-member company. I was the sole managing member and the sole authorized signer on the operating account. That account was frozen pending letters of administration, payroll for 14 people, 2 retainer refunds due, a subcontracted lab invoice. All of it sitting behind a hold that could not be released until a probate court appointed a representative for the estate of a man who was, at that moment, alive. Yvonne had access to our personal joint account, which is what it is, the ordinary money, the household money. She had about $19,000 in liquid funds, and a house she had just been removed from, and 3 children. She did not fall apart. The version of this story, where a wife collapses, is not the story that happened, and I am not going to tell it that way to make anybody comfortable. Within 4 days, she had done the following. She got the family into an extended stay off Moreland. She called Priya, and the 2 of them personally called every client, and kept 11 of the 12. She wired her own retirement money, hers, from before we were married, which I did not know still existed, to cover 1 payroll cycle. She got Julian's semester deferred rather than dropped. She got Nia back in school on the Monday, and she found a lawyer, and the lawyer she found was named Marguerite Soule, and Marguerite Soule had been trying real property cases in Fulton County for 29 years. Marguerite filed an emergency motion on day 23, but by then the writ had executed, and there is a hard truth about American procedure that nobody tells you until it is your turn. It is enormously faster to take something from someone than it is to get it back. It took 19 days to remove my family from a house they had lived in for 22 years. Undoing it was going to take 4 months and a special master. He knew that. That was the whole design. He was not trying to win a lawsuit. He was trying to close a refinance and get $1.9 million into an account before anybody could put a notice of litigation on the property, and he had every reason to believe he had the time. The one thing he had not planned for was that I would wake up. B was the nurse. She had a Cork accent, and she called me my love from the first day, and she had been doing my eye care and turning me for 3 weeks by the time I met her. You do not wake up from 31 days of sedation. You surface. It took 4 days before I could hold a thought long enough to finish it. There was a tube in my throat, so for the first week I could not speak at all. I wrote on a whiteboard, and my handwriting looked like a child's, and that frightened me more than the machine had. On the second day, B brought me my phone. 341 messages. The order in which I understood things matters, because the order is the reason I did what I did afterward. First, I understood that my family thought I had died, and then found out I had not. That was terrible, but it was survivable, and I could see how it happened. Then I found the obituary. Someone had sent it to me, a friend from Tech, on the second day, writing, "Is this real?" My name, my parents' names, my wife's name, my children's names, a chapel address. Then I found the photograph. 4 bags, the dress, my front door open with a lockbox on it. And then I scrolled up and found the messages from my wife. 70 of them across 19 days, and I read them in order, and I watched a woman go from, "They say you are on a machine, please, please," to, "I am doing everything, Ellis," to a message sent at 11:52 in the morning, on day 19, that said only, "He put us on the street. Dorsey." He has the deed. I could not speak. I had a tube in my throat. I picked up the whiteboard and I wrote one word and turned it around so BB could see it. Laptop. I got home 11 days later, against medical advice, with a portable oxygen concentrator, 35 pounds lighter than when I left, and a breastbone that was 8 weeks from being a bone again. Yvonne met me at Hartsfield-Jackson. Simone was with her. Nia stayed in the car and would not get out, and when I finally got to the car, she would not let go of my arm, and she rode all the way to the extended stay holding my forearm with both hands like it was a rail on a boat. That night, in a room off Moreland with 2 double beds, my wife showed me what she had saved: the albums, the birth certificates, the medical file, my father's site notebook from 1974, the one with the pencil sketch of a chilled water riser on the inside cover that I have looked at maybe 600 times, and the wooden box from our closet. Inside it was a letter my mother wrote me 11 months before she died. She gave it to me at the bakery on Glenwood, on a dialysis morning, in an envelope, and she told me not to read it until after, and I never had. It had been in that box for 14 years and I had not opened it, because I had decided at some point that as long as it was sealed, there was still something of hers I had not used up yet. I opened it in a hotel room, at 58 years old, with a scar in my throat, and no house. She wrote about ordinary things for most of it. The garden, a thing my father said. She wrote that she was proud of me, and that she was sorry she had not said it more often, and that she had spent so much energy defending Dorsey, that she had let me grow up thinking I did not require any. And then, near the end, she explained the will, because she knew. She had written it with my father, and she knew exactly how it was going to look in that conference room. She wrote that they gave Dorsey the company and the money because they were afraid of what he would become without something to hold on to. She wrote that they had been afraid of that since he was 19 years old. And she wrote that they gave me the house because it was the one thing they had that would still be there in 50 years, and because, and this is her wording, and I can hear her saying it, "You are the one who will still be standing under it." She was right about my brother. She was right about the fear, and she was right about what he would do without a scaffold, and she got the timeline nearly exact. She was wrong about one thing. She thought giving him more would protect him. It did the opposite. She spent 30 years teaching a man that when the ground gave way, someone would put something under him. And he believed it. He believed it so completely that when the ground gave way for the last time, he looked around for what was left to stand on, and the only thing left was his brother's house, and he did not experience taking it as theft. He experienced it as being handed the thing he had always been handed. I folded the letter up and put it back in the box. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the Fulton County real property records, and I typed in the parcel number of the house I grew up in, and I started reading the way I read a collapse. 2 days later I was downtown in person, because there are things you cannot see in a scanned image. This is where the story turns, and it turns on a habit, not on a feeling, so it is worth explaining how I actually work. When a structure fails, everyone on site wants to tell you why. The owner has a theory. The contractor has a theory. There is always a guy who says he told them about that column. None of that is evidence. What you do is you stop listening, and you build a timeline, and you put every physical artifact on it, and then you look for the artifacts that cannot both be true. 2 things that cannot both be true. That is the whole job. Everything else is arithmetic. So I built the timeline, and within 4 hours in that deed room, I had 4 pairs. The first pair was the notary. The corrective warranty deed is dated the 14th of a month, 11 years ago. The notary block bears the seal and commission number of a notary named Dwayne Pettiford. Georgia notary commissions run 4 years and are a matter of public record, searchable in about 90 seconds. Dwayne Pettiford's commission on that date had expired 14 months earlier. He was not a notary. He had not been a notary. A notarization by an uncommissioned notary is not a defective notarization. It is not a notarization. The second pair was Charlotte. The deed recites that it was executed by Ellis Otis Kittrell in Fulton County, Georgia, on that date. On that date I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, testifying in a deposition in a curtain wall matter. There is a transcript. There is a court reporter's certificate. There are 311 pages with my name at the top of every one of them, and a timestamp on the first and the last. The third pair was the signature. I have signed my name professionally for 35 years, and a licensed engineer's signature exists in more verified places than almost anyone's. Every sealed drawing, every report cover, every affidavit. Whoever produced that signature had traced it. Under magnification, you can see the hesitation marks, the little stops where the pen paused mid-stroke, because the hand was following instead of moving. My actual signature has one lift in it. That one had 6. The fourth pair is the one that ended him, the death certificate. England and Wales register deaths through the General Register Office. Every registered death gets an entry number in a specific sub-district, and the index is public and searchable, and a certified copy can be ordered by anyone for a small fee. The certificate attached to my brother's affidavit named a registration sub-district that has not existed under that name since a boundary reorganization years ago. The entry number, run against the index for that quarter, returned nothing. There is no such entry. The registrar's signature was a name that does not appear on any register of officers. And the apostille, the certificate that authenticates a foreign public document for use overseas, carried a reference number that, when checked against the issuing office's own verification service, came back to a document issued 8 months earlier for something else entirely. He had photographed a real apostille and pasted it onto a fake certificate. I sat in that room with the file in front of me, and my hands flat on the table on either side of it, and I did not feel rage. I have been told that is strange. What I felt was the specific, cold, clarifying satisfaction of a man who has found the crack and can now trace it all the way back to the pour. He had not committed one act. He had committed a sequence, and every element of the sequence had left a document, and every document was falsifiable by a records request that any competent person could file. He had built a structure with no load path. I photographed all of it, ordered certified copies of everything, and walked 11 blocks to Marguerite Sowell's office with a folder under my arm and an oxygen line in my nose. She read for 40 minutes without saying anything. Then she took her glasses off and said, "Mr. Kittrell, in 29 years I have had exactly 2 cases this clean, and in both of them the other side was already dead." Then she said the thing I have thought about since. She said, "I have to ask you a question before we go one step further, and I need a real answer, not a brave one. Do you want your house back, or do you want him ruined? Because those are 2 different files, and they cost different amounts, and they take different lengths of time, and people who tell me they want both usually stop wanting the second one about 90 days in, when their family is stable, and their brother's daughter starts calling them crying." I told her I wanted both. She said, "Say it again in 6 weeks and I will believe you." I said it again in 6 weeks, and in 12, and in 24. Here is what we built. The first piece was the void judgment. Marguerite filed a motion to set aside the eviction judgment under Georgia's civil practice statute on 2 independent grounds, either one of which was sufficient by itself. Ground 1, the court never acquired jurisdiction over Yvonne because she was never served. A judgment entered without personal jurisdiction is not a bad judgment or an unfair judgment. It is a void judgment, a nullity. And Georgia law says a judgment void on its face may be attacked in any court by any person. There is no deadline on that. It never becomes valid by sitting there. Ground 2. The magistrate court had no jurisdiction over the subject matter because the entire dispute was a dispute over title, and Georgia magistrate courts cannot decide title. Even if she had been served, that court could not have entered that order. Attached. Kevin Brackett's sworn return of service, which said he was standing on my porch at 6:41 in the evening. Attached beside it, a parking validation from a medical facility in Gwinnett, 2 text messages, and 1 photograph of a magazine cover with embedded location data, putting my wife 26 miles away at that minute. 2 things that cannot both be true. The second piece was the deed itself, a quiet title action in Fulton County Superior Court, brought against all the world, which is the Georgia proceeding that binds not just the parties in front of you but every possible future claimant. The court appoints a special master, a neutral attorney who examines the chain of title and reports. The core of it is a principle that most people have never heard of and that decides everything. A forged deed is void from the beginning. It is not voidable. It is not defective. It is not curable. It conveys nothing, and critically, it conveys nothing even to an innocent purchaser or lender who had no idea. A thief cannot pass title he never had, and every single thing built on top of that forgery falls with it. Which brought us to the mortgage. He had closed. On day 26, 3 weeks before I got home, Cavalry Point Mortgage funded a cash-out refinance of $1,900,000 against my house, recorded a security deed, and wired the proceeds. Under that rule, the security deed secured a debt against a property my brother had never owned for 1 minute. It was canceled. Cavalry Point, which had done nothing wrong except believe the county records, lost its lien entirely and became a creditor of a man with a $2.4 million hard money note in first position on his own house. That is when Cavalry Point's fraud unit stopped being a spectator and started being a participant, and that is the moment this stopped being a family matter. Because Cavalry Point is a federally insured institution, and when you submit a false statement to a federally insured institution to obtain $1.9 million, and you do it by wire, using another living person's name and social security number, you are no longer looking at a state court judge in Atlanta. The third piece was the money already gone. A notice of pending litigation, recorded immediately, which puts the entire world on notice that the property is in dispute and freezes it for any purpose. Then Marguerite went and got the wire. Of the $1.9 million, $910,000 went to Ansel Bridge Capital as a partial paydown, which bought him about 4 months. $440,000 went to a payoff on the second position on Cascade. $230,000 went to a vehicle purchase and a payment to a designer. $118,000 went to a retainer for a law firm. The rest sat in an account until it did not. The fourth piece was the people around him. Dwayne Pettiford, the expired notary. Georgia notaries are required to keep a journal. Marguerite subpoenaed it. For the date on that deed, there was no entry. Not a wrong entry, not an altered entry, nothing. Pettiford had not been in the same room as that document, in that year, in any year. He was 66 years old, and he had done it for $2,000. Kevin Brackett, the process server. Subpoena to his mobile carrier. On day 9 at 6:41 in the evening, his handset was connecting to a tower in Riverdale, 22 miles from my front porch. He had filed 41 returns of service that month. Investigators eventually looked at all of them. Charmaine Kittrell. She signed the affidavit of survivorship as a subscribing witness, swearing to the truth of a statement that I was dead, 9 days after her husband had received, from my wife, twice, the direct phone number of the intensive care unit where I was breathing. She booked the box truck. There is a confirmation email sent on day 16, 3 days before the writ executed, for a 2-hour window beginning at 10 in the morning on day 19. She knew what time the sheriff was coming before my wife did. The hearing on the motion to set aside was on a Tuesday morning in November, on the 6th floor of the Fulton County Courthouse. I had not seen my brother in 7 months. Marguerite told me to stay in the hallway until she signaled, because she wanted the room to belong to her before it belonged to me. So I stood in the corridor next to a window while she went in, and I could hear the ordinary sounds of a courtroom filling. His lawyer had told the court, in a written response, that the move-on's claims were the product of a family dispute, and that the purported survivor, his phrase, in a filing, in writing, had failed to appear at any proceeding and could not be produced. Marguerite waited for him to say that out loud. Then she said, "Your Honor, Mr. Ellis Kittrell is present, and he has been present in the building since 8:40, and she opened the door. I would like to tell you that walking into that room was some enormous moment. It was not. I walked about 40 feet with an oxygen line in my nose and sat down in a chair. That is all it was. But I watched my brother turn around. I have seen a lot of things fail. I have seen a post-tension slab let go, and I have seen a man's face when he realizes the report is going to say his name. I had never seen anything like what happened to my brother's face in that courtroom. It was not fear exactly. It was something more like a system losing power one panel at a time. He looked at me, and his mouth came open, and he stood up halfway, and his own attorney put a hand flat on his forearm and pressed him back down into the seat. Charmaine did not look at me at all. She looked at the table. The judge asked one question. She asked Dorsey's counsel whether he wished to be heard on the question of service. Counsel asked for a recess. The judge said no. The order came down that afternoon. The eviction judgment was set aside as void. A writ of restitution issued directing that possession be restored to Yvonne and Ellis Kittrell immediately. The court further ordered the lockbox removed and the locks rekeyed at the respondent's expense, which is a small thing, but it was in the order, and I have read that line more than once. 6 weeks later, the special master's report came back in the quiet title action, and the judgment followed. The corrective warranty deed was declared forged and void from the beginning, canceled of record. The affidavit of survivorship, canceled. The Cavalry Point security deed, canceled. Title confirmed, unencumbered, in Ellis Otis Kittrell. Marguerite added the civil counts and won every one of them. Slander of title, wrongful eviction, trespass, conversion of personal property, and punitive damages, on a finding that the conduct was willful, and showed an entire want of care, $4,612,000, against Dorsey Kittrell and Charmaine Kittrell, jointly and severally. And then his attorney asked for a meeting. They offered me the world. The offer was this. Dorsey would consent to the entire civil judgment, confess it, and cooperate fully in unwinding the mortgage. He would put the Cascade house on the market and turn over whatever came out of it. He would sign anything. In exchange, I would send a letter to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office and to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia, stating that the family had reached a full civil resolution, that restitution had been made, and that I did not wish to participate as a complaining witness. That letter would not have stopped a prosecution. A crime against the state is not mine to forgive, but everyone in that room, including me, knew exactly what a victim's letter of that kind does to a charging decision and to a sentencing recommendation. It is worth years. Sometimes it is worth all of them. His lawyer put it in the softest terms available. He said no one here wants to see a 62-year-old man do federal time. He said the children were the ones who would carry it. He said, and I remember the phrasing, that at some point the arithmetic stops and the family starts. And Dorsey spoke. It was the only thing he said in that room. He said, "Ellis, please." I thought about my mother's letter. I thought about the sentence where she wrote that she had been afraid of what he would become without something to hold on to. And I thought, every single person in his life, for 50 years, has arrived at exactly this moment and put something under him. Our mother did it with the car and the apartment and the tuition. Our father did it by handing him a company he had not built. I did it with $41,000 and then with $90,000 more. He put my 15-year-old daughter on a wet sidewalk in her socks, and his wife scheduled the truck 3 days in advance. And when it was done, he went and signed a mortgage application swearing my house was where he lived. He did not do that because he was desperate. He did that because he had a lifetime of evidence that this is how it goes. That you take, and then when it comes apart, you say please, and somebody rewrites the arithmetic for you. I have thought a great deal about what a person actually owes their brother. I have concluded that you owe him the truth about what he did, and you owe him the consequence of it, and that everything past that is not mercy. It is maintenance. It is putting a jack under a wall that is going to fall anyway, and calling yourself a good man for holding it up one more year. I told Marguerite to decline. She asked me, in the hallway afterward, if I was sure. I told her I had been sure since the deed room. The Fulton County District Attorney's Office indicted first, in the spring. Georgia has a racketeering statute that is broader than the federal one, and Fulton County uses it, and this was precisely the fact pattern it exists for. Not one crime, but an enterprise, multiple people, a shared purpose, and a pattern of criminal acts running from the drafting of the deed, through the recording, the false affidavit, the false return of service, and the removal. The state indictment named 4 defendants and 31 counts. Forgery in the first degree, filing false documents affecting title, false swearing, theft by taking, residential mortgage fraud, and the racketeering count on top. 9 weeks later, the federal indictment came down in the Northern District of Georgia. Wire fraud. Bank fraud, the one that carries up to 30 years, because Congress decided a long time ago that lying to a federally insured institution was its own category of thing. False statement to a financial institution, and aggravated identity theft, which is the count that matters most and that almost nobody outside a courthouse has heard of. If you use another actual living person's identifying information in the commission of certain felonies, you receive 2 additional years, mandatory, consecutive, and no judge in the country has the discretion to reduce it or run it alongside anything else. He had used my name and my social security number on a forged death certificate to take out a loan. Kevin Brackett pleaded first, within a month, and gave a full statement. He gave them the dates, the payments, and the fact that he had never been within 20 miles of my house. He is serving 30 months in state custody, and the 40 other returns he filed that month generated a separate review that is still going on, and has, I am told, undone a number of other judgments in this county, belonging to people I will never meet. Dwayne Pettiford pleaded to forgery and false certification. 22 months. He is 66 years old and he did it for $2,000. Charmaine went to trial in state court on the racketeering count and the false swearing count. Her defense was that she signed what her husband put in front of her and did not read it. The prosecutor put the box truck confirmation on the screen, sent by her from her account, on day 16, 3 days before a writ issued that she was not supposed to know about, for a 2-hour window starting at 10 o'clock in the morning on day 19. The jury was out for 4 hours and 10 minutes. She was convicted on both counts and sentenced to 12 years 8 to serve. Brielle was not charged with anything. She had moved into my house on day 21, slept in my daughter's room, taken down photographs of my children and stacked them in a closet, and posted a video walking through the kitchen my wife designed. She was named as a defendant in the conversion count, and there is a judgment against her for $164,000 that will follow her for as long as it is renewed, and I intend to renew it. Dorsey went to trial federally. It lasted 6 days. I testified on the 3rd. The government's case was almost entirely paper. The records custodian from the General Register Office, the apostille verification, the Notary Commission database, the deposition transcript from Charlotte, the forensic document examiner on the trace signature, Cavalry Point's underwriter, and the wire. I was on the stand for 2 hours and 10 minutes, and I was asked, at the end, by his attorney, whether it was possible I had signed the corrective deed years ago and forgotten. I said that on the date on that document I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that there were 311 pages of transcript establishing it, and that in any event I have never in my life signed my name 6 times in one signature. The jury convicted on all counts in under 5 hours. Sentencing was in October. Under the guidelines, with an intended loss of $1.9 million, an enhancement for sophisticated means, and an enhancement for the abuse of a vulnerable victim, and that one was argued hard, and it stuck, on the basis that I was sedated and on a ventilator at the time. The range came in at 97 to 121 months. The court imposed 121 months. Then, as required by statute, 24 months consecutive for the aggravated identity theft, 145 months, 12 years and 1 month. Federal sentences have no parole. He will serve a minimum of about 85% of it. Restitution of $1,900,000 to Cavalry Point, plus the state restitution order, plus the $4.6 million civil judgment. The state sentence runs consecutive to the federal one. He spoke before sentencing. He said he had believed I was dead. The judge, who had sat through 6 days of it, said that the record established that he had been given the telephone number of the intensive care unit twice on the day in question, and that a man who believes his brother is dead does not need a forged death certificate to prove it. Then she said one more thing, and it is the sentence I would keep if I could only keep one. She said, "The document you manufactured was not evidence of your belief. It was a substitute for the truth, and you built it because you knew what the truth was." There is one more piece, and it is the piece that people ask me about, and I am going to tell it plainly and let it be what it is. Ansel Bridge Capital, the hard money lender, had a $2.4 million note in first position on the Cascade House, cross-collateralized, personally guaranteed. Once the federal indictment came down, that note was not an asset to them anymore. It was a problem. A non-performing loan, guaranteed by a man about to be a federal inmate, secured by a property already carrying a $4.6 million judgment lien. They wanted it off their books. I bought it, through counsel, at a discount, for $1,460,000. The day that assignment recorded, I became my brother's creditor. The note had been in default for 11 months. I did not have to do anything creative. I sent the notice. I ran the advertisement for 4 consecutive weeks in the county legal paper the way Georgia law requires. And on the first Tuesday of the following month, because in this state foreclosure sales happen on the courthouse steps on the first Tuesday of the month, and they have for over a century, the property was sold under power of sale. I bid the debt. Nobody bid against me. It took under 4 minutes. There were maybe 15 people there, and most of them were there for other properties. And the man reading the sales was reading from a clipboard, and he read out the legal description of a house with a circular drive and a 2-story foyer. And then he said the words, and it was done, and he moved to the next one. Charmaine was already in state custody. Brielle had 30 days. I sold it in February. After the payoff of my own note, the surplus went to the clerk, and from there, against the restitution and judgment balances, which is where it belonged. People ask me if that was necessary. It was not necessary. Necessary was over the day the judge signed the writ of restitution. I did it because I have spent 30 years documenting the exact moment a structure stops being able to carry itself. And I know what happens when you leave a compromised element in place because removing it feels like too much. It carries for a while. It carries right up until the day somebody is standing under it. We moved back into the house on a Saturday. The locks had been changed twice, once by him and once by us. Brielle had painted the dining room a color, and we painted it back, and it took 3 coats because whatever it was did not want to leave. Yvonne's wedding dress could not be cleaned. It had sat in a contractor bag on a curb strip in the rain for 4 hours, and then in a storage unit for 4 months. The place on Highland tried twice, and then the woman there called Yvonne herself and told her, kindly, that it was not going to happen. Yvonne had it cut down and made into a christening gown, which is not a thing anybody in our family currently needs, and it hangs in a garment bag in the closet in the back bedroom. Simone is a licensed professional engineer now. She sat for the exam 8 months after all of this, and passed it on the first attempt, and I was in the room when she opened the email. Julian graduated. Nia is 17, and does not go barefoot in the house anymore, ever. And I have never asked her about that, and I am not going to. Priya is a full partner. There is a second name on the door, and it is hers. And about a year ago, I did one more thing, and I did it quietly, and it is not a soft ending, it is a claim. The roll-up out of Charlotte that bought my father's company still owned the name. They had shelved it. A dead trade name on a schedule of intangibles worth nothing to anybody. I called them and asked what they wanted for it. $12,000. There is a sign on the building on Memorial Drive now. Meridian Forensic Engineering. And underneath it, smaller, a Kittrell company. He will be in his middle 70s when he comes out. I will be 71. I have not written to him, and he has not written to me. Simone asked me, about a year in, whether I would ever go. I told her the truth, which is that there is nothing I need to say to him, and nothing he can say to me, that would change one document in that file. I have spent my whole working life standing in the wreckage of things people were certain would hold, and I will tell you the one thing I have learned that transfers out of engineering and into the rest of it. Everybody wants to know what caused the collapse. They want the single failure, the bad weld, the missed bolt, the storm. And there is almost always something like that, and it is almost never the answer. The answer is that somebody saw the first small movement, years earlier, and made an accommodation. And then somebody saw it again and made another one, because the first accommodation had worked. And by the time it comes down, there are 20 years of small accommodations stacked underneath it, every one of them made by a reasonable person for a reasonable-sounding reason. My brother did not become a man who forges a death certificate for his living brother on a Wednesday in the spring. He became that man over 50 years, in a house where every time the ground opened up under him, someone reasonable slid something underneath. I loved my mother. She was the best person in our family. And she did him more damage with 30 years of kindness than my father ever did with 30 years of inattention, because my father only failed to notice him, and my mother taught him that consequences were a thing that happened to other people's sons. So here is what I would leave you with. When somebody in your own blood takes something from you, everyone around you will start using the word forgiveness, and they will use it to mean absorb it. Take the loss quietly, keep the table set, do not make the holidays difficult, and they will tell you that this is the bigger thing to do, the more spiritual thing, the thing you will be glad of later. I do not believe that anymore, and I am not going to pretend I do to sound wise on the internet. You can forgive a man completely and still hand the file to the United States Attorney. Those two things live in different rooms. Forgiveness is about what you carry. Consequence is about what he carries. And the moment you let him put his down, you have picked it up, and you will carry it for the rest of your life while he goes and finds the next reasonable person. My mother was right that my brother needed something to hold on to. She was wrong that it had to be someone else's house. If you got something out of this one, subscribe before you go. That is the one that actually matters. I put a new story up every single week, and the next one is already written. Hit like on your way out. It genuinely helps this reach more people. And in the comments, he sat in a room and said please, and I said no. Would you have? I read every one of them. I will see you in the next one.